For a bit of context, I'm a 22-year-old gay male with a cocktail of mental illnesses and drug problems. The main illness that affects me on a daily basis is BPD, borderline personality disorder, which comes with, in my case, pretty intense paranoia, low self-esteem, and a confusing mix of wanting affection constantly but also not trusting anyone. I've used Grindr and many other dating apps since I was 18 and have admittedly had a lot of sexual encounters and casual relationships, many of whose names I probably couldn't even remember. Please don't judge me. So to my encounter. This all started in late November/early December of last year and has been a constant feature in my day-to-day life since. I receive a message on Grindr from a blank profile. No pic, no info, nothing. The message simply read, "I know who you are," followed by a picture of my face. I believe it was a picture from my old Facebook account. Bearing in mind my profile didn't have a face pic, as I like to stay under the radar on those kinds of apps due to family and friends and stuff. I had no idea how to respond, so I didn't. A day passed and nothing more had happened, so I shrugged it off as somebody just fucking around. But then later that day I received another message. "Why are you ignoring me?" This time I responded because I was admittedly a bit on guard and started to panic. I said something along the lines of, "Yeah, whatever, you know who I am, so..." At this point I just blocked them, half because it was just a bit weird and half because I was actually scared of their reply. Nothing else occurred over the next few days and I was relieved because I had been pretty shaken up by the whole thing. It may seem like nothing to some people, but it really did affect me. My paranoia and general distrust of everybody obviously played into this. I was at a friend's house when I received my next creepy message. This time a text from a contactless number. "Hey you, why did you block me?" At this point the slight feeling of unease had escalated into a genuine concern and obsessive thoughts about who this could be, why they were messaging me like this, and how they A, knew I was from my Grindr profile, and B, how they got my number. I didn't tell my friend about this and I just put my phone away and carried on like nothing was wrong. But I think he knew something was wrong because he kept asking if I was okay or if I needed a glass of water because I was pale and clammy, and had gone really quiet. In the following weeks I received more messages off different Grindr accounts along with the same lines of, "I know who you are, don't ignore me, I'll keep coming back, blah blah blah." It was coming up to Christmas and I just couldn't deal with it anymore, so I deleted my Grindr account, made a new Snapchat, and changed my number. I was meant to be enjoying time with my family, not being scared and suspicious of everybody in my life. Over Christmas Eve and up to towards the New Year, nothing happened. I'm assuming they got bored. Fine by me. Then in early January it started up again with the same old routine. It was text this time, which scared me because I had changed my number, and I'm pretty sure the number I was receiving them from was different from the first time around. This time they were much more threatening, not in a violent way, but by the fact that they seemed to know about my movements and whereabouts. I'd go shopping and the moment I got home I would check my phone and see a text that would read, "I saw you shopping at Harley Shopping Center today," or "I like your jeans." The frequency seems to have simmered down slightly, however, and now I only receive a text maybe 2 or 3 times a week instead of nearly every day. But they just seem so threatening, as if they're trying to let me know they can get to me wherever and whenever they want. So this is pretty much where I'm at now. Still receiving those weird threatening texts, sometimes from several different numbers. I've run the numbers through Facebook and found nothing. I've Googled the numbers again and again. Nothing. I'm thinking they may be using a random number generator, but I have no idea who this could be. Is it somebody who I've hooked up with in the past that has become fixated? A friend trying to fuck with me? Somebody I've never met who knows who I am for some reason? Please don't advise me to contact police. It's not something I do. The thing is, I'm not a small guy. I'm 6 foot and about 180 pounds and have 8 years of martial arts and boxing training under my belt. But it doesn't matter how big or tough you are when you don't know who the threat is, why they're doing it, or where they are at any given moment. It makes you feel exposed and vulnerable, especially when they seem to know who and where I am. It's just deeply unsettling. I really don't know what to do. I am generally pretty cautious when it comes to online dating. Chat until comfortable, meet in public, and have friends knowledgeable of my whereabouts for the first meet, just in case. All that jazz. The dates were usually pretty fun, or duds, but I've never had an issue and never been fearful. I have, in fact, made some really great friends. Others I just don't hear from again. No harm, no fuss, and simple. Recently, I met this guy online through POF. I talked quite a bit through the app, and then, often for hours on the phone. He seemed like a great dude, so we decided to meet. He lives about 45 minutes away, a town I do not visit often at all, so I'm very unfamiliar with it. There was a talk about me staying there, and we decided to grab some drinks. I thought maybe I'd just get a room for myself as to not stay at his place off the bat. I don't know why, but a lot of unusual judgment just kind of flew out the window at some point because we left my car near a park. I had no idea how to get back to it from this place, if I needed to, because he took so many twists and turns on the drive where I was. Oh yeah, he suggested I crawl in the back of his van because it's a small town and he doesn't want anyone to see me. Why didn't I just turn around and walk back to my car right then? He also took my phone to lock in a box to hide its location. I know, I should have seen the red flag. Like I said, I don't know what I was thinking at the time. I thought I based all our conversations that this may be part of a silly, what he thought was to be some sort of gang. He even kinda presented it as such when I talked to him before I left town. We finally arrived at his home and hung out, watched movies, and talked. It was pretty normal. We had some dinner, and at some point, he begins kind of acting off, asking a lot of questions in a kind of intimidating tone, making me feel a little dumb, dissecting everything I'd say, constantly pacing, chain smoking. He was intense overall. I began to feel a little uncomfortable, even suggesting he would drive me back to my car and we would call it a night so I could go home. He refused. He thought I was joking, said if I wanted to leave I could call a cab. I could not afford to allow the meter to run while I tried to figure out where to tell the driver to fund my car. At this point, I do have my phone back and had messaged a friend to keep an on-hand case of 911 come get me situation. I'd know how to get my car from a certain point if she could get me. Things settled though. We felt a bit more comfortable. Okay, well, I was just gonna sit now, get the night over with and get back to my car in the morning. And that's what eventually happens, and I make it home safe. Even after that, we keep talking at least. Phone calls, texts, and we both agree it was intention awkward. He apologized, so we tried to hang out again. It was actually loads better. I felt comfortable and lots of laughs. It was good actually. I willingly stayed the night this time rather than feeling trapped. He offered to grab my pillow from my bag for me. When he went to the other room, when he did, my makeup bag had fallen out. This was actually irrelevant. He returned it to the place and let me know. Okay, I fell asleep talking. He drove me to my car the next morning. We didn't talk much the rest of the day. I was pretty busy being a bridesmaid and doing things of that lines. Well, he texted me in the evening, and I tell him I'd call him later if he'd like because I was busy. I didn't get a response, so I texted him when I was free to see if he was awake and still wanted to do that. This was around 2 a.m., non-abnormal time for us at all. This is where he first goes off on me, asking me what kind of script I had prepared for him and what I actually want from him. Okay, what script? I tell him that, as we already discussed and agreed upon, I like to start as friends while we get to know each other. He then tells me I'm stupid out of towner for toting around a makeup bag as a facade and some kind of smokescreen. He said it was sloppy of me, and the fact that I'd call later was some kind of red flag, though he knew I had things to do. All I kept thinking was, what? It was easy for me just to leave it all behind. A week later though, I get a voicemail demanding a call right away. I was at work and my building has bad reception, and I saw no missed call notification, just a new voicemail, so I had no idea who left it. I went back to listen to it again after an hour or so. I could check the number that left it and the message was gone. I know I saved it. Even checked erase messages and it wasn't there. Well, I assume it was him because the same thing happened with a message he left the following night. Said some heinous things. Just awful things. He said things along the lines of, "Listen, you stupid fucking cunts. You wanna come in here with your fucking makeup bag full of fucking gels and stupid shit, trying to collect evidence at my place so you can fucking put people in cages and torture them like a dumb fucking cunt. You wanna tell me about your good fucking person? Fuck the fuck off, you stupid fucking whore. Run and hide. Like I said, you deserve to be hiding. Enjoy the prison that you put yourself in by being a dumb cunt. And fucking enjoy it. Hi, and don't fucking lie that you're gonna be sleeping in the fucking bed next time, or you're gonna be doing some fucking detective work. I gotta fucking slap you in the mouth." So far, that's the last I've heard. As of Sunday morning. Thankfully, he knows a little personal info of mine. He doesn't know where I live. This kind of thing has never happened to me before, and I'm not sure how to respond. I'm just hoping it doesn't escalate any further. So I matched with this girl on Tinder named Jenna. Jenna and I went on our first date January 26th. She knew I was out of a long-term relationship and still maintained occasional contact with my ex, Mary. Jenna and I officially started calling each other boyfriend and girlfriend around mid-February. 3 days ago, while I'm in the shower, she goes through my phone and reads some old messages between Mary and I. A few casual ones and a few very affectionate ones before Jenna and I had even started seeing each other or even met. Jenna packs all of her things and is heading out of the door when I get out of the shower, with my phone. She text messages a bunch of people saying things like, "I'm apparently an asshole and Mary is a manipulative bitch." She hacks into my Facebook and makes a post calling Mary a whole slew of names and then blocks and unfriends several of my friends. She does this exact same thing on my Twitter. I get a hold of a coworker's phone and use it to try and contact her and sign back into my Facebook. Once she realizes I did this, she changed my passwords and my email passwords as well. Eventually she tells me that she wants to talk things out and to meet at my place. I play along so I can get my phone and passwords back. She gives me my phone back and makes me call Mary, and I have to tell her that I'm cutting her out of my life. I had talked to Mary earlier before this and wondered something like this might happen and to just play along. We both have a background in theater, so we had a very convincing argument over speakers so Jenna can hear. Jenna gives me my passwords and I immediately change them. I tell her she should leave and she doesn't understand why I want her out of my life. She goes home very upset about me breaking up with her over this. Jenna starts posting and commenting on my Facebook and I block her. I blocked her on everything and she begins calling me over and over, not saying anything when I try to pick up the phone. I block her number. I start receiving the same calls over and over from a Colorado number. Eventually I go to my phone provider and change my number. I also changed the locks on my door in case she took a key. The next day she makes a Facebook page calling me a piece of shit and Mary a manipulative cunt, and she hacks into my alternate Twitter account. I tell her if she calls me one more time or posts one more thing about anybody I know, I'm calling the police. I get an email saying that my application for a credit card with a bank I don't use has been approved. I call the bank and I tell them what's happening and they put a freeze on the account. Several of my friends have told me to call the police and I finally realize enough is enough. The police come and tell me that she has some sort of file with them and that her name isn't even Jenna. It's something completely different. They issue a warning of harassment and if she tries to contact me again, I'll call the police and she gets arrested. Monday rolls around and I have to call the fraud people and get all of my accounts frozen and investigated and stuff. I realize this is a lot, but this is actually a pretty bare bones version of this story. Basically, the reason I'm posting this is now that the police got involved and I've had to change my locks and number, and all is solved, I'm starting to feel the emotional damage of being abused and harassed by someone I was starting to really care about, and I don't know how to deal with it. I just really wish this didn't happen. For clarity, I am a straight 21-year-old female. So in November of 2016, I went through a pretty bad breakup. In October 2017, I finally felt comfortable enough to try to get back into the dating world. So like a moron, I got on Tinder. And it wasn't my first rodeo with Tinder, but this was the strangest thing that happened to me. So towards the end of October, I met a guy named Dave on Tinder. And from the looks of it, he was an okay guy. He was funny and a gentleman. We talked for about 2 weeks and set up a time to go on a date. We decided to meet in the city where he had recently moved to, which was about 35 minutes away from my house. I got to the bar to wait for him and he was 15 minutes late. He walked in and looked relatively similar to his pictures, which I was happy about. And then he opened his mouth to talk and had a very strange voice, like he was always on the verge of crying. Very weird. He had some tattoos on his arm, including the all-seeing eye Illuminati symbol. Trying to break the tension, I jokingly said, "Illuminati confirmed, tell me all your secrets." And he goes, "What the hell are you talking about? Don't say stuff like that in public." I just kinda laughed it off and he was being really weird. He then says, "You know the people who pry are people who die, right?" I just looked at him and I genuinely didn't know how to respond. Fast forward about 20 minutes and a couple of my friends came to the bar at my urging. I moved to sit on the same side as him so that my friends could sit on the same side of the booth. The minute I sit down, he puts his hand on my knee and squeezes. And not like, "Oh, I'm interested," but a hard fucking squeeze. I looked at him and told him to stop and he leans over and whispers, "You have lovely kneecaps." Like, what the hell? By the time my friends left, he had 7 beers. It was a Tuesday. As I go to close my tab, he stands behind me and he had a boner. And I mean full-on boner. I very quickly signed my receipt and stepped away. As I'm getting ready to say goodbye, it starts raining, and then he informs me that he walked to the bar from his house and asked for a ride home. Reluctantly, I agreed, and on the very short drive to his house, he informs me that it's not actually his house and that he's living in his sister's basement. When I finally park in front of his house, he leans over to kiss me and I tried to give him the cheek, and he physically turns my head and puts his entire tongue in my mouth, and I pulled away and this guy did it again. I finally pulled away and said, "Get the fuck out of my car." And he responds with, "I am in love with you. I knew from the moment I saw your pictures. You have to come inside and meet my sister and her husband." I told him if he didn't get out of my car, I was calling the police, and he started crying but got out of my car. So that's my Tinder story. What a creep. As a bit of backstory, I was working in a small chain motel in the Midwest as a night auditor. So my hours were normally 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. With those kind of hours and being a woman, I'm bound to have some weird stories. The scariest time I've ever had working there happened within my first month. So it was a little before my shift started, and because I was single and 22, I was on Tinder before work. I matched with this guy who seems cool. A little goth/alternative and into Ouija boards and tarot, which is my type, so I was hype at the time. We talk for a bit and I tell him I have to go to work and we say goodbye. Now that night was my first night off training, so I was running the motel by myself for 9 hours. I was already a little nervous, but then this vaguely familiar guy comes up to the front desk and asks for me by name. In my head I've got red flags blaring at me because this dude is weird. Not by looks, but just by vibe. I tell him that I'm me and he explains that he was the guy from Tinder, and he saw that I was less than a mile away, so he went to see if I was possibly working at his hotel. That's right, this guy was staying where I worked. Red flag number 2. I stayed behind the comfort of my desk for 2 hours because this guy won't stop talking to me. Mostly about how his ex left him and how he beat people up and wanted to bang me. Needless to say, I was uncomfortable, and this hasn't happened to me in a work environment before, so I didn't know what to do. He finally decided to go to bed at around 2 to 3 a.m. and I take a much needed smoke break. I go outside and right after I spark up, guess who shows up? Yump, creepy dude. I snooped a bit on his account, and he was a painter and he was doing work locally, so he wasn't from here. He tells me about where he's from and keeps getting closer and closer to me. He asks if he can smoke weed, which I said yes, just so he'd get away from me. I showed him where the cameras weren't, and he pulled me in, smelled my neck, and started grabbing my ass. I swiftly hit him, and I told him he better not fucking touch me again. I threw my cigarette on the ground and grabbed my phone to call my boss before going inside. Creepy dude rips my phone from my hand and proceeds to text himself. Now he had my number. The first thing he sends me is a grotesque picture of his extremely body-modded penis. I've seen my fair share of penis, but that was nothing like I'd ever seen before. Then came the creepy BDSM porn gifs with captions like, "I can't wait to do this to you. You know what room I'm in." Now I'm already freaking out, and I don't know why I didn't call the cops and my boss wasn't answering. So there's me in the back office having the panic attack of my wife when I get one more video. Why I clicked on it in the first place, I'll never know. I refuse to say what I saw in detail, but it was a snuff porn film. Very violent, very sexual. I then locked myself in the back room, cried, and waited a few hours before proceeding to make hotel breakfast. The texts went on for a few days until I had enough and got the balls to tell my boss. He immediately kicked out Creepy Dude and banned him from our hotel. His company is not even allowed to book with that hotel anymore. In hindsight, I should have just called the police, but I was too scared. So, creepy, crazy guy from Tinder, don't contact me ever again. I've had my fair share of weird and creepy encounters, but this one stands out as the most memorable. For starters, I'm a teenage guy, and I'm semi-openly gay. With that out of the way, let's talk about my first experience with Grindr. This happened a little over 2 years ago when I'd gotten my first phone. I got a phone way later than most people my age. At first, nothing really changed. I'd already gone years without having a phone while everyone else had one, so I wasn't immediately addicted to it like most people. Part of that might have been because I didn't have many friends to text, and another part might have been because I was pretty used to not using one in the first place. It takes me a bit to get out of my shell, so it's rare that I meet or become new friends with new people. But after a couple of months of having my phone, I started using apps like Tinder. It was easier for a socially awkward me to talk to people over the internet than it was for me to meet new people in person. I never talked to the people in there for more than a couple of weeks because I was always too afraid to meet in person. Eventually I caught on to what people were really using the apps like Tinder for though. They were all just looking for a quick bang. I started coming around to that idea when I heard about Grindr. Being the young, lonely guy I was coming to terms with being gay, I jumped at the opportunity to talk to other people like me. Naively, I thought Grindr was just Tinder for gays. I learned quickly how wrong I was. My experience with Tinder was that usually people around my age pretended to be interested in you. They'd strike up a conversation and ask you about yourself before subtly hinting at sex. Grindr dropped all pretense. The dudes there knew what they wanted and they weren't shy about telling you. Not to mention, they were all much older. I'd always known there were going to be people a few years older than me. I'd lied about my age to make the account after all. Believe me, I know how stupid that is. But it was rare that I'd find someone that wasn't 10 years older than me. So of course, when I did find someone who was, and who didn't immediately ask to see my dick or ask where I wanted to meet up, I was pleasantly surprised. His profile said his name was John, that he was only 18, and that he lived on the other side of town. So within reach, but far enough away that I felt safe. It didn't hurt that he was pretty cute too. John and I started talking, and to me, it seemed like something clicked. He was funny. We had similar interests. He never talked about sex, and whenever I was stressed or needed to vent about something, he listened, and offered usually pretty sound advice. So of course, after talking for over a month, I grew to trust him. And one night out of the blue, I decided that he should know that I wasn't 18 like my profile said. And if he and I were ever going to be a thing, not that that was something we ever talked about, it was just a stupid hope of mine at the time. He took it well and said that he suspected because of how often I talked about school. but that didn't mind him at all, seeing as he was only a couple years older than me. After that, it felt like we grew only closer. We talked every day, and I started to tell him more and more about myself, what I did most days, etc. So when I told him I was going to the mall with my friend Lynn to do some Christmas shopping, it wasn't weird. As a little side note, at the time, on the Grindr app, there was a feature that lets you know how far away people were from you. Lynn and I were about our day at the mall and had a merry old time. Another side note, Lynn was one of the only people at the time who knew I was gay, and maybe because of that, I had a huge crush on him. Don't ask me how that makes sense. We eventually decided to get a bite and eat at the food court. While we were eating, I checked my phone, and more importantly, Grindr. Well, I looked at John's profile and said he was only a few hundred feet away, which was weird, seeing as we'd been a few miles apart. But I didn't think much of it because it was the mall after all. There were hundreds of people in here. We had a brief conversation in the app that went something like this. Having fun stalking me at the mall? I was, but now I think I'm more interested in your friend. Asshole. Just kidding. You're the only one I have eyes for. I didn't think much of it at the time, so the rest of the day went on as normal. But looking back on it now, that convo makes my skin crawl. Even though we were joking, he never denied the stalking, and according to the app, he was clearly there. He knew what I looked like, roughly because of my Grindr profile, so it really isn't a stretch to say that he was watching my friends and I while we were shopping and eating. New Year's Eve rolled around, and by then, John and I had been talking for what seemed like forever. And on that night, I was with Lynn and my only other two friends celebrating at one of their houses. The friend whose house we were gathered at, Nick, had managed to score some liquor and raided their parents' fridge for its beer. As so it goes without saying, most of us were drunk. For a little context, Nick lived on the other side of town from me and my parents and dropped me off at his house to spend the night there. We kept drinking, hooting, hollering, wrestling around, and God knows what else. The countdown on the TV, it was a few minutes from midnight, so despite our drunken antics, we'd settled down into the couches to watch the countdown. I was next to Lynn on the 3-person couch with another friend on the other side of him, while Nick sat on the love seat by himself. A lot of factors went into what happened when the countdown hit midnight. Most of it was the amount of alcohol I consumed, obviously, but the close proximity along with the wrestling we'd been doing didn't help either. Not to mention my already enormous crush on Lynn. So when the countdown ended, and when I turned to see Lynn looking at me, I leant in to kiss him, while the other two jumped and began hollering again. He of course pushed me away and yelled, "What the hell?" He was pissed, clearly, but he didn't make any moves to try and kick my ass, so I took that as a good sign and tried to explain myself. He, however, wasn't having it. He just told me to piss off before I could finish, and called me a faggot. By then, Nick and our other friend had calmed down and were staring at us. Drunk, embarrassed, and more than a little emotionally hurt, I just got up and made my way for the door. Nick tried to stop me, but the other two didn't say anything, so I just kept walking. As I mentioned earlier, I lived on the opposite side of town, so I don't really know what my idea was, but I kept on walking in the general direction of where I lived. This might have been an okay plan if I hadn't been drunk, there hadn't been a foot of snow on the ground, and it hadn't been freezing cold. After walking for a few minutes, I decided to hide inside of a bus shelter at an intersection to warm up. While I was warming up, I got on my phone to look at my messages on Grindr. Because I'd been too busy being drunk earlier, John and I hadn't really been talking, but I quickly started pouring my heart out to him and telling him that I was going to freeze to death outside. After doing his best to comfort me, he suggested that he could give me a ride home, because the app said I was only a couple of miles away from him and that he wasn't just going to let me freeze to death trying to get home. I'm not proud of it, but because I wasn't in the best state of mind, I agreed and sent him my location. What happened over the next hour was easily the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, and likely is to happen to me. A few moments passed, and a truck slowly pulled up to where I was sitting. I wasn't sure if it was John, so I waited there, hoping he would make some gesture or something for me to get in, which of course did happen. The door opened, and I took that as my cue. It was a big truck, so I had to put a little effort into pulling myself in. Because I was caught up doing that, and it was dark in the truck, I never actually got a good look at the guy at the wheel. I say guy because he clearly did not look a thing like what John's profile picture did. John was much older than 18. I'm not good at estimating ages, but if I'd had to, I'd say he looked at least 50. His face was deeply lined and he was sporting gray stubble, and his hair was clearly thinning. After I stared at him for a minute, he quietly said, "Hi," and grabbed my hand for a shake. His hands were massive and almost made mine look like a little kid's. He was a heavier set guy, but it was clear that he was strong. Looking back, I think he probably worked construction or something. He started driving and we made some small talk, but it was clear I was very uncomfortable, so he eventually shut up. I wasn't trying to be rude, but he clearly wasn't what he portrayed himself as. We'd hardly been driving 5 minutes though before I realized we were headed in the opposite direction of my house. I laughed a little and said, "Guess I forgot to let you know I live in the other direction, on the other side of town." He only responded with a slow, as if he were agreeing, but didn't make any indication of turning. "I can give you the address," I said after a moment. He looked at me a little at the mention of that, but still didn't slow down. If I hadn't been worried before, I definitely was now. I started looking around to see what I recognized and reached for my phone, but just as I was starting to get past the lock screen, he asked what the address was. I calmly told him that if he pulled over, I could pull it up on my phone so we would have directions. He mumbled something, but did pull into the parking lot of a church that I recognized and shut off the engine. I was pretty much shitting my pants, but I was able to get over my phone. While I held my phone in one hand, my other crept slowly for the door handle. I wasn't going to stick in that car any longer, so while I pretended to fumble with my phone a bit more, I quickly tried to pull the handle only to find that the door was locked. Another second later, I felt a huge smack on the side of my head that left my ears ringing and my head spinning even more than it was when I'd been drinking earlier. I was able to unlock the trunk's door, but not before taking another hard smack to the head, and afterwards, I stumbled and basically fell out of the truck, dropping my phone in the process. After probably taking far too much time orientating myself, picking up my phone to find a completely shattered screen, and trying to stand up, I started wobbling away. I heard John yelling, but I didn't know what he was saying. My ears were still ringing, and I was getting farther and farther away from the truck. What did register, though, was the unmistakable sound of a truck engine starting. I started trying to make my shaky legs run, but it wasn't going nearly as well as I would have liked. I knew where I was, the church parking lot we pulled in only a few blocks away from Nick's house. After stumbling some more and full-on tripping once my legs finally started working a little more efficiently, unfortunately, that had left John more than enough time to drive his trunk up next to me with the windows rolled down. He was telling me he was sorry and that to just get in the truck. After realizing that wouldn't work, he pulled in front of me completely, almost running me over in the process, and opened the driver's side door. The crazy funk had gotten out of his truck, and I just knew he was going to beat me unconscious. Still, my head was getting clear with every second, and my legs started cooperating more and more, so I was able to avoid him and start full-on sprinting out of the parking lot and down the street. I tripped more than a couple of times, mind you, but I was fast enough to get away from John while he was on foot. I was scrambling down the sidewalk, trying to find my way home before John could catch up in his truck. But all the houses in the area were essentially the same, and even if I hadn't had the difficulty finding Nick's place, I couldn't just lead John there. I was still running on the sidewalk when I heard John's trunk behind me. Deciding there was no way I was going to get away from him in the open like this, I started trying my hardest to run through the snow of a park that I knew would put me on the wrong road to make it to Nick's house, but I had a plan. Knowing he couldn't very well follow me with his trunk through the park, and that he'd never catch me on foot, I turned around to see John zooming down the road, presumably to put himself on the other side of the park by the time I made it across the snow-covered field, which was exactly what I'd hoped he would do. I waited a few seconds before making my way back to the sidewalk. I had just been running on, and started sprinting down the streets once again. I was only a couple of minutes before I made it to Nick's house, and John's trunk was nowhere in sight, but I still looped around and ran through the backyards of the houses on Nick's street just to make sure he wouldn't know where me and my friends were. When I eventually did make it to Nick's house, I started slamming my hand on his back door as loud as I could without drawing the attention of anyone else. To my surprise, it wasn't Nick that answered, but Lynn. For a moment I was about to start weeping because part of me figured he'd just slam the door and leave me out there. He didn't, of course. He wasn't a monster, and even if I'd pissed him off, anyone could see that I was in rough shape. Len hurried me in and woke up Nick so he could help clean me up. It was in Nick's bathroom that I discovered just how rough a shape I was in. There was dried blood all down the left side of my head coming from my ears, but as far as any of us could tell, there was no cut in or on my ear. Who knows what that means? But what was more concerning were all the huge scrapes on my elbows, knees, and a pretty big one on my forehead. I hadn't thought I'd fallen that hard, but I guess the adrenaline and alcohol had dulled my senses enough that I didn't feel it. After they helped me patch myself up, I stripped out of my soaked clothes and borrowed some from Nick. I finally had time to be overwhelmed. I started crying loudly in the living room where everyone was now, awake and watching awkwardly. They'd asked what happened, and I told them some guys tried to jump me. It was a lie, but somehow it seemed preferable to telling them that I'd let a stranger I'd been talking to on Grindr for months now, and who had by all accounts been a friend to me, pick me up in his truck where he had tried to abduct me. I don't know when I got to Nick's house, but it was almost 4 a.m. by the time I decided it was safe to sleep. Unfortunately, I didn't get to sleep in to recover from my night the next day because we all had to clean Nick's house before his parents got home. A few feet away, but there was a couch open and he'd opted to sleep on the floor with me, which had opened a good sign. It was. We're still friends today. I'm not a writer, so I apologize if this isn't as well written as it should be, or as if it seemed a little disjointed. Anyway, this is the first and likely the only time I'll tell the true version of the story. So, thank you for listening.